For decades, no one inside the palace had ever seen Camilla raise her voice at William, until reportedly last week she did exactly that, and what she said in that room has apparently left him unable to look at her the same way since. To understand why this moment carries so much weight, you need to understand what's actually been happening behind the scenes for months. King Charles's cancer treatment, according to those familiar with his medical team, has quietly moved into what insiders describe as a precautionary phase, a term that sounds reassuring on the surface but, according to sources close to the family, has done little to ease the private anxiety building around him. Charles, by most accounts, has continued pushing forward with a packed schedule of public engagements, determined, those close to him say, to project strength and stability for a monarchy that's already weathered more uncertainty than most people realize. But William, according to insiders, hasn't been able to watch that determination without growing increasingly alarmed. Sources close to the Prince of Wales say he's been quietly urging his father for months to scale back, to hand off more of the grinding day-to-day workload, and to prioritize his health over the optics of a monarch who never stops. This wasn't reportedly framed as William trying to seize control or rush his father off the throne. According to those who know him well, it came from something far simpler. A son who's already watched his own wife fight cancer, who understands exactly what that battle costs a person behind closed doors, and who reportedly can't shake the fear of watching his father push himself past a point there's no coming back from. And that's exactly where Camilla, according to sources familiar with the family's internal dynamics, has seen things very differently. Word inside the palace suggests Camilla has remained firmly convinced that Charles stepping back publicly, even briefly, would send the wrong message entirely, not just to the country, but to a monarchy still working to prove its resilience after everything the family has endured in recent years. Those close to her describe her position as protective in its own way, insisting that visible strength from Charles reportedly matters just as much for the institution's stability as his actual physical recovery. But according to insiders who've watched this play out, that same protectiveness has apparently put her on a collision course with the one person trying to protect Charles in a completely different way. For weeks, according to those familiar with the situation, this disagreement stayed exactly where royal disagreements are supposed to stay: quiet, private, handled through careful conversations rather than confrontation. William reportedly raised his concerns respectfully. Camilla reportedly pushed back just as calmly. Neither, sources say, seemed willing to escalate things further, and for a while, insiders believed the matter would simply resolve itself the way most internal palace disagreements do, through patience and time. That changed, according to those close to the matter, during a state banquet at Windsor Castle. Sources present that evening describe Charles arriving visibly fatigued, having insisted on attending despite what insiders call growing concern from his medical team about the toll his schedule was reportedly taking. William, according to those familiar with what happened next, reportedly watched his father struggle through the evening and made the decision, right there, to say something directly, in the moment, rather than waiting for another quiet conversation behind closed doors. What he said next, according to sources with knowledge of the exchange, is what reportedly triggered everything that followed. According to insiders, William didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Those familiar with the moment say he simply stated, plainly and in front of several senior aides, that continuing to push his father through engagements like this one was reportedly no longer just about optics. It was becoming dangerous, and someone in that family needed to start prioritizing Charles's health over how the monarchy looked on any given evening. The room, according to those present, went completely silent. And that silence, sources say, is exactly when Camilla reportedly stepped in. What she said in response, according to insiders close to the matter, wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was, by every account gathered since, the sharpest, most direct confrontation anyone inside that circle had witnessed between the two of them in years, delivered calmly, deliberately, and reportedly with enough conviction that even the aides in the room understood immediately this wasn't going to end with a quiet apology and everyone moving on. According to those familiar with what happened, Camilla reportedly told William, in front of the very people whose job it is to protect the family's public image, that his father's strength was the only thing currently holding a fragile institution together, and that undermining that strength publicly, even out of love, could do damage William wouldn't be able to take back. Sources say William didn't respond right away. What he reportedly said instead, according to those with knowledge of the exchange, wasn't directed at Camilla at all. It was, insiders claim, a single sentence aimed squarely at his father, one that apparently caught everyone in that room completely off guard, and one that Charles, by most accounts, still hasn't publicly addressed since that night. According to sources close to the family, whatever William said next didn't just end the argument. It reportedly started something else entirely, something that, according to insiders, is still quietly unfolding inside the palace right now, and that neither Camilla nor William have shown any sign of walking back. The silence that followed William's words, according to those present that evening, didn't last more than a few seconds. But sources say it felt like an eternity to everyone standing in that room. According to insiders familiar with the exchange, what William reportedly said to his father wasn't an accusation. It was, by most accounts, something quieter and far more devastating. A simple, direct question about whether Charles actually understood what he was asking his family to watch him do. Sources close to the matter say Charles didn't answer immediately, and that his silence, more than anything William had said, was what reportedly shifted the entire mood of the room. Camilla, according to those present, apparently took that silence as confirmation that the conversation had gone somewhere it shouldn't have. Word inside the palace suggests she moved quickly to redirect things, insisting the matter be continued privately rather than in front of aides who, by the next morning, according to sources, had already begun quietly discussing what they'd witnessed. And that's reportedly where the real complications began. Because according to those familiar with how quickly things move inside the palace, private conversations rarely stay private for long. Within 48 hours, insiders say, versions of what happened at that banquet had reportedly reached several senior staff members who hadn't even been in the room, each account apparently shifting slightly in the retelling, some framing William as protective and justified, others suggesting he'd overstepped in a way that could damage the family's public unity at a moment they could least afford it. For a brief window, according to sources close to the situation, it looked like things might actually calm down. Charles, insiders say, reportedly requested a quiet family meeting, described by those familiar with it as measured, even conciliatory, an attempt to address the tension directly before it spread any further. According to those present, Charles reportedly acknowledged William's concerns, admitted the pace of his schedule had been demanding, and even suggested he was open to reviewing which engagements he might scale back going forward. For a moment, sources say, it genuinely seemed like the disagreement had run its course, that cooler heads had prevailed, and that the family would move past this the way they'd moved past disagreements before. That sense of resolution didn't survive the week. According to insiders with knowledge of what happened next, a member of Charles's own medical team reportedly submitted an updated assessment, one that painted a notably more cautious picture than the precautionary phase language the public had been given. Sources familiar with its content say the report didn't describe an emergency, but it did reportedly recommend a significantly reduced schedule, a recommendation that, according to those close to the matter, directly validated everything William had said that night at Windsor. And that's when, according to insiders, Camilla reportedly made a decision that caught even those closest to her off guard. Rather than accepting the medical recommendation as the natural resolution to the disagreement, sources say Camilla instead reportedly pushed back against it, questioning whether the assessment was being interpreted too cautiously, and suggesting, according to those present, that scaling back Charles's public presence now, so soon after the tension at the banquet, would look less like prioritizing his health and more like the family caving to internal pressure. If accurate, insiders say, this wasn't simply a disagreement about medical advice anymore. It was, according to those close to the matter, Camilla reportedly digging in even harder, precisely because backing down now felt to her like losing. William, according to sources familiar with his reaction, was reportedly stunned. Those close to him say he genuinely believed the medical report would settle things, that facts from his father's own doctors would finally end a disagreement he'd never wanted to have in public in the first place. Instead, insiders claim he found himself facing the exact same resistance as before, except now it was tied directly to medical guidance rather than simply differing opinions about optics. If you're finding this one as tense as I am, let me know in the comments what you think is really going on here, because it's about to get a lot more complicated. According to those with knowledge of what happened next, William reportedly requested access to the full medical report himself, rather than relying on secondhand summaries filtered through palace communications staff. Sources say this request, though procedurally reasonable, was interpreted by those close to Camilla as an escalation, a signal that William no longer trusted the information being shared with him through normal channels. Whether that interpretation was fair or not, insiders say the damage was already done. What had started as a private disagreement about how hard Charles should be working was reportedly turning into something with far higher stakes, a question of who inside the family actually had the final say over decisions affecting the king's health, and whether that decision belonged to Charles himself, to his wife, or to the son who would one day inherit everything Charles was currently trying so hard to hold together. And according to those familiar with where things stood by the end of that week, nobody involved seemed willing to be the one who backed down first. By the following Monday, according to those close to the palace's internal communications, the disagreement had stopped being something anyone could pretend was private. Sources say a formal request landed on Charles's desk, one requiring a decision within 72 hours, whether to accept his medical team's recommendation to scale back his schedule or to formally overrule it and continue as planned. Insiders describe this as unusual, a rare moment where a medical recommendation for a reigning monarch was reportedly being treated as a decision requiring immediate, documented resolution, rather than something handled quietly and adjusted as needed. For William, according to those familiar with his reaction, the deadline felt like validation. For Camilla, sources say, it reportedly felt like exactly the kind of pressure she'd been trying to avoid from the very beginning. Then came the detail that reportedly changed how several people close to the situation understood the entire disagreement. According to insiders with knowledge of the medical team's internal notes, the updated assessment hadn't actually been prompted by any single dramatic health event. It had, sources say, been building for weeks, flagged quietly after a series of smaller signs Charles's own doctors had been monitoring, fatigue patterns, minor irregularities, nothing sources describe as alarming on its own, but enough, combined, to justify caution. Which meant, according to those close to the matter, that this recommendation had nothing to do with the banquet, nothing to do with William's confrontation, and nothing to do with Camilla's resistance. It had been coming regardless. The argument at Windsor hadn't caused this moment. It had only reportedly dragged it into the open sooner than anyone was ready for. That single detail, insiders say, reportedly landed differently with everyone involved. For William, it meant he hadn't overreacted, hadn't manufactured a crisis to force his father's hand. For Camilla, according to sources close to her, it meant something harder to sit with. That her instinct to protect the monarchy's image had put her, unintentionally, in direct opposition to a decision that had never actually been about image at all. According to those familiar with what happened next, this is reportedly when Queen Camilla's public composure, so consistently steady throughout this entire situation, began quietly cracking behind closed doors. And that's exactly when Edward stepped in. Sources close to the family describe Prince Edward as someone who has largely stayed outside the public tension between his brother and his nephew, respected by both sides for a steadiness that neither William's urgency nor Camilla's protectiveness has ever fully carried. According to insiders, Edward reportedly requested a private conversation with Charles directly, not to take sides, sources say, but to lay out plainly what continuing this standoff was actually costing the family, regardless of who was technically right. By most accounts, Edward didn't raise his voice either. He didn't need to. If you're still here and this story has you hooked, drop a comment letting me know who you think is actually right in this one, because what Edward reportedly said next changes everything. According to those with knowledge of the conversation, Edward reportedly told Charles that the family had spent decades being defined by moments like this one, disagreements that started privately and ended up shaping public perception anyway, whether anyone intended that or not. He reportedly reminded Charles that the monarchy's strength had never actually come from pretending weakness didn't exist. It had come, insiders say Edward argued, from the family's ability to make hard decisions quietly before the public ever had to choose a side. Sources say Charles listened without interrupting. What he reportedly said afterward, according to those familiar with the exchange, wasn't a decision. It was a request, one that insiders say immediately shifted the entire dynamic of the standoff. Charles reportedly asked for one final conversation, with William and Camilla both in the room together, no aides, no advisors, before the 72-hour deadline expired. According to those close to the matter, that conversation was scheduled for the following evening. Sources say William agreed immediately. Camilla, according to insiders, reportedly hesitated before accepting, apparently aware that whatever happened in that room would likely determine not just Charles's schedule, but the shape of her relationship with William going forward. And according to everything confirmed so far, that meeting is reportedly happening right now, behind closed doors, with no one outside that room knowing yet which way it's going to end. The door reportedly stayed closed for almost 2 hours, and according to those waiting outside, nobody left that room during that entire time, not for a phone call, not for an update, nothing. When it finally opened, sources close to the family say the mood wasn't triumphant. It wasn't tense either, at least not in the way everyone braced for. According to insiders present just outside, Charles reportedly emerged first, followed by William, and then Camilla. And the first thing several staff members noticed, sources say, was that none of them were avoiding each other's eyes. According to those familiar with what happened inside, Charles reportedly opened the conversation not by defending his schedule and not by asking either of them to back down, but by admitting something insiders say surprised both William and Camilla equally. That he'd known for weeks that his pace wasn't sustainable and that he'd let the disagreement between the two people he trusted most become a substitute for making the decision himself. Sources say William reportedly started to respond, but Camilla, according to those present, spoke first. According to insiders with direct knowledge of the exchange, Camilla reportedly told Charles that she'd spent this entire disagreement convinced she was protecting the monarchy's strength, only to realize, somewhere in the middle of the standoff, that she'd actually been protecting her own fear of watching him decline in public. That admission, sources say, reportedly changed the entire tone of the room. It was Edward, according to those familiar with the meeting's final minutes, who reportedly said the one line that everyone in that room still brings up when discussing what happened. "This family doesn't lose strength by admitting it's tired," he reportedly said. "It loses strength by pretending it never was." According to insiders, nobody responded to that immediately. Sources say Charles simply nodded, and that the decision that followed wasn't dramatic at all, just quiet, practical, and, according to those close to the matter, entirely his own. The following morning, Buckingham Palace reportedly issued a brief, carefully worded statement confirming that the king's schedule would be adjusted going forward, framed publicly as a routine step in his ongoing recovery, rather than any acknowledgement of internal disagreement. Sources say the language was deliberately unremarkable, designed to close the story publicly without inviting further speculation about what had actually happened behind the scenes. But according to those close to the family, what changed privately reportedly went further than a revised calendar. William and Camilla, insiders say, haven't returned to exactly what they were before that banquet. Sources close to both describe the relationship as respectful, even warmer in some ways, but no longer built on the assumption that they'll always see things the same way when it matters most. According to those familiar with the family's dynamic since, that shift hasn't gone unnoticed by anyone paying close attention. What lingers most, according to insiders, isn't the disagreement itself, but what it reportedly revealed, that even inside a family built around presenting a united front to the public, the people closest to the king are still capable of fundamentally disagreeing about what actually protects him. And according to sources familiar with ongoing palace planning, this likely won't be the last time that tension resurfaces, especially as decisions about Charles's future, and eventually William's, continue moving closer to the center of the conversation. So now it's over to you. Do you think Camilla was right to push back, or do you think William saw something the rest of the family was too afraid to say out loud? Let me know your honest take in the comments.